I should have known it wasn't a joke when she looked straight at me before lifting the glass. The music was soft, the kind they play when everyone is supposed to feel something warm, something lasting. My granddaughter looked beautiful in her white dress, sunlight catching the edge of her veil as she laughed with her bridesmaids. I remember thinking how proud I was to be there, how I had spent months making sure this day would be perfect. Every detail, every check, every quiet sacrifice no one asked about. And then I saw Ashley walking toward me, her smile just a little too sharp, her steps too certain for someone holding a full pitcher of red wine. 2 liters, at least. I noticed that detail because I had paid for it myself. Imported. Expensive. Chosen carefully for the reception. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral layered over something colder. "Let's make this memorable," she said, her voice light, almost playful. And then she tipped the pitcher. The wine hit my shoulder first, then spread across my chest, soaking into the pale blue fabric I had picked out weeks ago. It was warm, heavy. It kept coming. People gasped, then a few laughed, unsure. Someone clapped, thinking it was staged. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, feeling the weight of it drip down to the floor, pooling near my shoes. Ashley laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. "It's just a prank," she said, glancing around as if waiting for approval. I looked at her, really looked this time, and for a moment everything else faded. The music, the chatter, even the bride. It was just her and me, and something behind her eyes that wasn't new. Something I had seen before, in smaller moments. At dinners. In passing comments. In the way she corrected me when no one else noticed. I reached for a napkin from the table beside me and dabbed at my sleeve, slow and careful. The stains spread, darker, deeper. No one stepped forward to help. Not immediately. They were watching, waiting to see how I would react. I gave them nothing. Just a small, polite smile, the kind you offer strangers. Inside, something shifted. Not anger. Not even hurt. Not in the way people expect. It was clarity. Sharpened. Quiet. Because in that moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to fully admit before. This wasn't about a joke. It wasn't about wine. And it certainly wasn't spontaneous. Ashley didn't look surprised by what she had done. She looked satisfied. And as I stood there, soaked and silent in the middle of a celebration I had helped build, I realized she hadn't chosen that moment by accident. She had chosen me. I could feel the fabric clinging to my skin as the wine settled, heavy and cold now, the sweetness in the air turning sour the longer I stood there. Someone finally handed me a stack of paper napkins, thin and useless, and I thanked them with a small nod as if nothing unusual had happened. Across the room, the music continued, softer now, uncertain, like even the band was waiting for permission to move on. Ashley had already stepped back, blending into a circle of guests who leaned in close, whispering behind half-covered smiles. I did not need to hear them to understand. I had lived long enough to recognize that tone, that quiet shift in a room when something crosses from awkward to intentional. Daniel was nowhere near me. That was the first thing I noticed after I looked away from her. My son had been standing just a few feet away before, talking to one of the groomsmen. Now he was gone, as if the moment had erased him. I scanned the crowd slowly, not searching with panic, but with a kind of measured curiosity, and I found him near the bar, his back turned, his shoulders slightly tense. He did not come over. He did not ask if I was all right. He did not even look in my direction. That told me more than anything Ashley had done. I reached for my purse, carefully lifting it from the chair, making sure not to rush, not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. My reflection caught in the glass of a nearby window, distorted by the afternoon light, but clear enough for me to see the deep red stains spreading across my chest, uneven, impossible to ignore. It looked deliberate. It looked like a mark. I pressed the napkin against it again, slower this time, watching as it absorbed nothing of real consequence. Around me, conversations began to resume, cautious at first, then louder, as if the room had collectively decided the scene was over. But it was not over for me, not even close, because as I stood there, I began to remember small things, moments I had dismissed. The way Ashley insisted on handling the vendor payments, even though I had offered to take care of them directly. The way she laughed when I asked about the final guest list, telling me not to worry about details at my age. The way certain invoices never quite made it into my hands. Always redirected, always explained away with a smile that did not reach her eyes. At the time, I told myself it was generational, that young people preferred to manage things differently. I told myself to step back, to be gracious, to let her feel in control on a day that mattered to her. But standing there, with the weight of the wine still pulling at my dress, those memories rearranged themselves into something sharper, something that no longer felt accidental. I glanced once more toward Ashley, and this time she met my eyes. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see it again. That quiet satisfaction. That certainty. And in that brief exchange, I understood that whatever had just happened was not the beginning of something. It was the result of something that had been building for a long time. Carefully, quietly, right in front of me. I set the napkins down after a while, because they were no longer doing anything except drawing attention to the stain, and I realized that continuing to dab at it only made me look like I was trying to fix something that could not be fixed. So I stopped. I let the fabric sit as it was, heavy and marked, and I straightened my shoulders the way I used to when I walked into rooms where I did not feel welcome, but had every right to be. The air felt different now, not colder, but sharper, as if every sound had edges. I picked up a glass of water from the nearest table, not to drink, but to give my hands something steady to hold, and I began to walk. Not toward Ashley. Not yet. I moved slowly across the room, past clusters of guests who shifted slightly to make space, their conversations dipping as I passed, and rising again. Once I was out of earshot, I noticed things I had not paid attention to before. The seating chart placed near the entrance, my name printed smaller than the rest, tucked at the corner of a table far from the family section. The floral arrangements that I had approved over email, but never saw the final invoice for. The coordinator who avoided eye contact when I glanced her way, as if she suddenly remembered something she did not want to explain. Each detail was small on its own, easy to dismiss, but together they formed a pattern that felt deliberate, curated. I paused near the edge of the dance floor, watching my granddaughter laugh with her friends, unaware, untouched by any of this. And for a moment, I felt something close to relief that she did not have to carry what I was beginning to understand. This was never about her. It was about control. It was about who was allowed to matter and who was expected to step aside quietly. I turned slightly and saw Daniel again, still near the bar, now speaking to Ashley. She leaned in close, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her expression soft, almost concerned, as if she were the one managing a difficult situation. He nodded once. Then again, his posture easing, whatever tension had been there dissolving under her voice. He still did not look at me. That was when the last piece settled into place, not with a dramatic realization, but with a quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. I had not just been excluded. I had been repositioned. Gradually, carefully, until moments like this could happen in plain sight and still be dismissed as harmless. I set the glass of water back down on a passing tray without drinking it, and reached into my purse, pulling out my phone. My fingers moved calmly, scrolling through messages, confirmations, documents I had saved out of habit more than suspicion at the time. Transfers, receipts, names, dates. I had not realized how much I had kept, or why, until now. I locked the screen again and slipped the phone back into my purse, lifting my chin just slightly as I exhaled. Across the room, Ashley laughed again, lighter this time, confident. And I understood something with complete clarity. She believed this moment belonged to her. She believed the story had already been written. And for the first time that afternoon, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, not for them, not for the guests, but for what I now knew I would do next. I did not go to the restroom to clean up, even though that would have been the expected thing to do, the polite thing, the invisible thing, because I understood now that disappearing, even for a few minutes, would only complete the picture she had started painting. Instead, I turned and walked toward the long table near the center of the reception where the event coordinator was reviewing a clipboard, her pen moving quickly as if she could write herself out of discomfort. She looked up when she sensed me approaching, her eyes widening just slightly before she forced a professional smile into place. I returned it, calm, measured, as if I were simply another guest asking a routine question. I asked her how the evening schedule was structured, what time the final payments were expected to be released, and whether all vendors had been settled according to contract. My voice did not tremble. It did not rise. It carried just enough clarity to make her pause before answering. She hesitated on the last question, only for a second, but it was enough. Enough for me to see that something had not been handled the way it should have been. She explained that there were still pending balances, that final authorizations were expected later in the evening, that everything was being managed through a single point of contact to keep things simple. I nodded as if that confirmed exactly what I had been told before, even though I knew it had not. I thanked her, gently, and stepped away, leaving her with the faint impression that nothing was wrong, that I had simply needed reassurance. But I was not reassured. I was certain. I moved next toward the gift table, where envelopes and wrapped boxes had been arranged neatly, each tagged and cataloged. I recognized my own handwriting on one of the larger envelopes, the one containing a contribution I had made quietly, without announcement, because I believed generosity did not need an audience. I picked it up, feeling its weight, and for a moment I considered how easily it could be overlooked, redirected, absorbed into a system that no longer included me as it once had. I placed it back exactly where it had been, aligning it carefully with the others, because this was not the moment to change anything visibly. Not yet. Across the room, laughter rose again, louder this time, the kind that fills space and pushes discomfort into the corners. Ashley was at the center of it, telling a story, her hands moving as she spoke, her voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to lean in and enjoy the performance. Daniel stood beside her, nodding, smiling, participating as if nothing had shifted, as if nothing had been revealed. I watched them for a few seconds longer than necessary, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet observation, the way one studies something that has finally made sense after a long period of confusion. Then I reached into my purse once more and took out my phone, opening the messages I had saved, the confirmations that bore my name, the transfers that traced a path from my account to theirs, to vendors, to accounts I had never been introduced to directly. I did not scroll quickly. I did not rush. I let each detail settle, each number, each date, each signature that had once felt routine and now felt intentional. When I closed the screen again, I did not feel overwhelmed. I felt organized, clear, focused in a way I had not been before. I lifted my gaze and looked toward the small stage where the microphone stood waiting for the next announcement, polished and untouched under the soft lights. It occurred to me then that every event has a moment when someone speaks, when the room quiets, when attention shifts naturally without force. I had attended enough gatherings to know exactly how those moments worked, how easily they could be redirected without causing a scene, without raising suspicion. I adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder, smoothing the front of my dress even though the stain remained, dark and undeniable, and I began to walk toward the stage, not hurried, not hesitant, but with the steady pace of someone who no longer needed to ask for permission to be heard. I stepped onto the small platform without announcing myself, timing it between songs when the room naturally softened and people began to shift their attention, glasses lowering, conversations pausing just enough to notice movement near the microphone. The coordinator looked up again, this time more alert, but she did not stop me. No one did. I reached for the microphone and adjusted it slightly, the faint feedback hum cutting through the air for a brief second before settling. A few heads turned, then a few more. It does not take much to gather attention in a room already expecting it. I did not clear my throat. I did not rush to speak. I simply stood there until the quiet formed on its own, until even the laughter at the far end of the room faded into something smaller, something uncertain. Then I began. I congratulated my granddaughter first, my voice steady, warm enough to sound appropriate, sincere enough to avoid suspicion. I spoke about family, about how days like this are meant to bring people together, to reflect not just celebration, but trust. The word lingered a moment longer than the others. Trust. I let it sit there before continuing. I mentioned how much effort goes into creating a day like this, how many moving parts are handled behind the scenes, how easy it is for things to appear seamless when someone is carefully managing every detail. A few people nodded. Some smiled politely. Ashley glanced toward me then, her expression tightening just slightly, the first crack in her confidence since the afternoon began. I did not look at her directly. Not yet. I spoke instead about responsibility, about how financial matters, even in joyful moments, require clarity, honesty, and respect for the person who provides them. The room grew quieter. Not dramatically, but enough that the edges of conversations disappeared completely. I reached into my purse slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my phone, holding it loosely in my hand, as if it were nothing more than a reference point for what I was about to say. I mentioned that sometimes, in the process of helping, people sign documents they trust others to handle, transfers they assume are going where they were intended, invoices they believe reflect the truth. I paused again, letting the words settle, watching as a few guests exchanged glances, their smiles fading into something more attentive. Then I lifted my eyes and finally looked at Ashley. Just for a second, long enough for her to understand that this was no longer a general statement. This was specific. I did not accuse. I did not raise my voice. I simply stated that earlier in the day, I had reviewed certain records, confirmations that suggested some payments had not followed the path I had been assured they would. The coordinator shifted uncomfortably. Daniel turned fully toward the stage now, his expression no longer distant, no longer neutral. I continued, calmly, explaining that I believed in resolving matters with transparency, especially in front of those who had gathered to celebrate something built on trust. I held up my phone slightly, not dramatically, just enough for it to be seen, and said that I had every intention of ensuring that all accounts were settled correctly, starting now. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was complete. And in that silence, I could feel the entire room begin to understand that whatever had happened earlier was no longer the story people would remember. I lowered my hand slightly, but did not put the phone away, allowing the weight of what I had said to settle into the room without rushing to fill the silence that followed. People shifted in their seats, some turning toward Ashley, others toward Daniel, as if waiting for one of them to respond, to correct me, to laugh it off the way she had done earlier. But no one laughed now. Ashley's smile had disappeared completely, replaced by something tighter, something controlled, as she stepped forward just enough to be seen without fully committing to the center of attention. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice calm, practiced, the kind of tone that is meant to smooth over details before they can take shape. I nodded slightly, as if I had expected that response, and I agreed that misunderstandings do happen, especially when responsibilities are shared but not clearly documented. I kept my voice even, almost gentle, but I did not step back. I mentioned a specific transfer, then another, referencing dates and amounts without looking down, because I no longer needed to check. I had already memorized what mattered. The coordinator took a small step closer, her clipboard pressed tightly against her chest now, her expression no longer neutral but attentive in a different way, as if she understood that this was not a private concern anymore. Daniel moved toward Ashley, his hand hovering near her arm, uncertain whether to support or to steady himself. He glanced at me, finally, really looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in his expression that had been missing all afternoon. Not anger, not even defense, just realization. Ashley spoke again, this time with a slight edge, suggesting that managing an event of this size required flexibility, that last-minute changes were normal, that everything would be reconciled after the celebration. I listened without interrupting, allowing her to finish, because I had no interest in arguing. I was not there to debate interpretations. I was there to establish facts. When she stopped, I simply clarified that reconciliation requires accurate records, and that I had already forwarded the relevant documentation to my financial advisor earlier that day, just as a precaution. The word precaution seemed to land harder than anything else I had said. A few guests exchanged looks again, quieter this time, more deliberate. I continued, explaining that until those records were fully reviewed and aligned, I would not be authorizing any remaining payments tied to my accounts. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The implication carried on its own. The coordinator's posture shifted immediately, her attention moving between me and Ashley with a kind of professional urgency. She asked, carefully, whether that meant certain vendor balances would need to be paused. I confirmed it with a simple nod. No elaboration. No apology. Just confirmation. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but visible in the way his shoulders dropped, as if the ground beneath him had changed without warning. Ashley's composure held, but only just, her eyes flickering for a fraction of a second toward the coordinator, toward the guests, toward the room that was no longer entirely on her side. I adjusted my grip on the microphone, not to speak again, but to signal that I was finished. I had said enough. I stepped back slightly, giving the room space to absorb what had shifted, what could no longer be dismissed or reframed as a harmless moment. And as I stood there, still marked by the stain that had started all of this, I realized something simple and steady. Respect is not something you ask for once it has been taken. It is something you restore by deciding exactly where your limits begin and where they will no longer be crossed. The coordinator stepped closer to the stage, her voice lowered but firm as she spoke to someone through her earpiece, her eyes no longer drifting but fixed, alert, calculating adjustments that had not been part of her original plan. Around the room, conversations did not resume this time. They shifted. People were no longer pretending this was just another moment in the evening. They were watching, quietly, carefully, the way people do when they sense that something real has surfaced beneath something polished. I placed the microphone back into its stand without ceremony and stepped down from the platform, not looking at Ashley, not looking at Daniel, but aware of both of them in the way you are aware of a storm even when you are not facing it directly. My shoes made a soft sound against the floor as I walked, steady, unhurried, each step deliberate, as if I had already decided exactly where I needed to be next. I did not return to my seat. I moved past it, past the tables, toward the open space near the entrance where the light from outside still filtered in, pale and consistent, untouched by what had just unfolded inside. Behind me, I could hear the first signs of disruption, not loud, not chaotic, but structured. Questions being asked, clarifications being requested. The kind of quiet urgency that replaces celebration when details begin to matter more than appearances. Daniel called my name once, not loudly, but enough for me to hear. I stopped, just for a moment, without turning around immediately. There was a pause, a space where I knew he was deciding what to say, how to say it, whether to defend, to explain, or simply to reach for something that might still hold. When I turned, his expression was no longer distant, no longer passive. It was unsettled, searching, as if he was trying to understand how the afternoon had shifted so completely. Ashley stood a few steps behind him, composed again, but only on the surface, her posture straight, her chin slightly lifted, holding on to control in the only way she still could, through appearance. "We can talk about this later," Daniel said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it, measured in a way that suggested he was choosing each word carefully. I looked at him for a second longer than necessary, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but with a clarity that left no room for negotiation. "We are talking about it now," I replied, my tone even, not confrontational, just final. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I simply stood where I was, allowing the distance between us to say what I no longer needed to explain. Ashley took a small step forward then, inserting herself into the space between us without physically crossing it, her voice calm again, almost reassuring, as if she could still shape the narrative. She suggested that things had been misunderstood, that numbers could look different depending on timing, that it was unfortunate this had been brought up in front of everyone. I listened without interrupting, the same way I had before, because interruption gives the other person control over pace, and I no longer needed to rush anything. When she finished, I nodded once, acknowledging that she had spoken, but not agreeing. "That is exactly why it needed to be said here," I answered, quietly, without emphasis, letting the words rest where they were. For a moment, no one moved. Not Daniel. Not Ashley. Not even the guests who had drawn closer without realizing it. And in that stillness, I understood that the balance had shifted completely. Not because I had raised my voice or forced a scene, but because I had refused to remain silent in the one moment they expected me to disappear. I adjusted the strap of my purse again, a small, ordinary gesture, and turned toward the exit, not as someone leaving in defeat, but as someone who had already finished what she came to do. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, and for the first time since I arrived, the air felt clean, untouched by the weight of expectation or performance. The door closed softly behind me, but the sound carried enough finality to separate what had just happened from what would come next. I did not rush down the steps. I paused there, one hand resting lightly on the railing, not because I needed support, but because I wanted a moment to feel the stillness without interruption. Inside, the music had not resumed. I could tell. There is a certain rhythm to celebration, and once it breaks, it does not recover easily. I reached into my purse again, this time not for documents or confirmations, but for my car keys, the familiar weight grounding in. A way that nothing else had all afternoon. Before I moved any further, I heard the door open behind me, quicker this time, less controlled. Daniel stepped out, his breath uneven, his expression no longer composed. He stopped a few feet away, not close enough to touch, not far enough to pretend distance. "Mom," he said, and the words sounded different now, heavier, as if he had not used it properly in a long time. I turned to face him fully, the light catching the stain on my dress again, no longer hidden by indoor shadows, but I did not try to cover it. He looked at it, then back at me, and for a second, he seemed unsure where to begin. "You could have told me," he said finally, his voice lower, almost careful. I held his gaze, steady, not unkind, but not yielding either. "I did," I replied just as quietly. "Many times. Just not in a way you chose to hear." He inhaled slowly, the kind of breath people take when they realize something too late to undo it. Behind him, through the open door, I could see movement now, staff speaking to guests, the coordinator directing attention away from the center, trying to rebuild something that had already shifted beyond repair. Ashley appeared in the doorway but did not step outside, her silhouette framed by the interior light, watching, measuring, deciding what to do next. Daniel followed my line of sight for a brief second before stepping slightly to the side, as if to block that connection, but it was unnecessary. I was not looking at her anymore. I had already seen what I needed to see. "This is not how today was supposed to go," he said, and there was something almost fragile in the way he said it, as if he still believed the day itself had gone wrong, rather than the choices that shaped it. I nodded once, acknowledging the truth in his statement, but not the meaning behind it. "No," I agreed, "it is not." I did not elaborate. I did not soften it. I simply let it stand. He waited, perhaps expecting more, an explanation, a reassurance, something that would make the situation smaller, easier to carry. I offered none of that. Instead, I stepped past him, slow and deliberate, moving toward the parking lot where my car waited, unchanged, reliable. Untouched by any of this. With anger. Not with a dramatic break. But with a simple understanding that respect, once withdrawn, cannot be negotiated back into place through patience alone. I glanced once more toward the entrance and saw Daniel step outside again, this time slower, his posture no longer uncertain but heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of something he had not prepared for. He looked around, searching, and when his eyes found my car, he hesitated. He did not walk toward me. He did not raise his hand. He simply stood there, the distance between us no longer measured in steps, but in choices that had already been made. Behind him, the doors opened once more, and Ashley remained inside, just visible through the glass, speaking to someone, her expression composed again, controlled, already adjusting to what came next. That was when I understood the final piece of it, not about them, but about myself. I did not need to wait for an apology that might never come. I did not need to stay connected to something that required me to shrink in order to belong. I had already given enough, more than enough, and what I chose now would not be defined by what I had lost, but by what I refused to accept again. I reached forward then, turned the key, and the engine came to life with a quiet certainty that matched my own. I did not look back again, not because I was trying to forget, but because I no longer needed to remember it in the same way. As I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the road, the evening light stretching ahead, I realized that the mark on my dress would fade, the stain would wash out in time, but the clarity I carried with me would not. And for the first time that day, I felt something settle into place, not as a reaction, but as a decision. I would not return to where I had been dismissed. I would move forward, exactly as I was, without asking to be included, without waiting to be chosen, because I had already chosen myself.